Hi, SWAE. It's Karnak of Star Wars Armada Explained. We're going to look at the last objective that is being released in Rebellion of the Rim. We're looking at Infested Fields. So, Infested Fields, I have it blown up nice and big right now so you guys can read all the text that's on there. I'm going to read through Infested Fields. Then I have to do some more reading to go over the Exo Gorfs, or Xenogorfs as I like to call them, because they got the smooth head. They look like Xenomorphs from Aliens. I don't know. Anyway, Infested Fields setup. Place the obstacles as normal, excluding the station. After placing obstacles, place one objective token on each obstacle. Then, the second player places the two Exogorfs obstacles, each touching a different obstacle, meaning the ones already placed on the board. We'll get to that. Special rule: when a ship or squadron overlaps an obstacle, that ship or squadron's owner may remove the objective token on that obstacle to gain one victory token. After the start of each squadron phase, after Exogorfs perform their attacks, remove each Exogorf from the play area. Then the second player moves the obstacle each Exogorf was touching to within distance 1 to 2 of its current location. End of round. For each Exogorf obstacle not in the play area, the second player chooses an obstacle and places one Exogorf placing or touching that obstacle. Okay, so let's get into it. The wording on this, some of this stuff is just a little confusing. I don't know why they decided to word something a certain way, but I'll make sure I'm breaking it down. So the first thing I want to go over is the Exogorfs. So I'm going to read from the Rebellion of the Rim booklet. It's a lot of wording. Out of all the new obstacles, they're the ones that have the most stuff to get into. I'll try to just focus on the most important points. So when placing Exogorfs, they must be placed touching other obstacles. They cannot overlap ships or other obstacles or tokens in the play area, whether that be like mines or other tokens left from like the interdictors, etc. If you do place them overlapping squadrons, when you do place the Exogorf, move any overlap squadrons out of the way. Then the player who did not place the Exogorf places the overlap squadrons back down around the Exogorf so that they touch it. So if you put the Exogorf down on top of a bunch of squadrons, you pick them all up like as if they've been overlapped by a ship, and then the other player places those squadrons, touching the Exogorf around it as best as he can. What's the Exogorf's effects? If a ship overlaps it, it suffers 1 damage, which again, that 1 damage can be suffered to any hull zone. If it has shields, that damage must be suffered to the shield on that zone. If there is no shield, then it takes a face down damage card. What other abilities does it have? At the start of each squadron phase, starting with the second player and then alternating, so essentially, second player goes first, chooses an Exogorf, then the first player chooses the only other one that's on the table, because there's only 2. Then that player each performs an anti-squadron attack against each squadron at distance 1. The Exogorf uses the following rules. The Exogorf is treated as a ship with an anti-squadron armament of 3 blue die. It is not friendly to anything. If a squadron suffers at least 1 damage from an Exogorf, if it has not yet activated, it will activate them, just like Dutch's ability. An Exogorf is treated as a ship with 1 hull zone while it is attacking. It has a 360-degree firing arc, which means it can shoot in any direction. For its line of sight, it can trace line of sight through itself and any obstacle it is touching. Okay, that's all that in a nutshell. Let's dive right in. I'm going to shrink this down if you want to follow along. If you go to the Rebellion in the Rim, or excuse me, if you go to the Star Wars Armada wiki and go to the Rebellion in the Rim wiki page, you can pull up this objective off of there. Otherwise, I just got to shrink it down just so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay. Now on Vassal, the Rebellion in the Rim stuff is not quite in. So for this objective, all the tokens or all the obstacles have objective tokens on them. So to stand in, because the Exogorfs are about the same size as these asteroid fields right here, so I'm going to use them as stand-ins. I'm going to have them pointed straight up to show that they're the Exogorfs. Okay, so let's go through step by step. Setup. Place obstacles as normal, excluding the station. So you take that station, you pick it up, and you chuck it out the window. Okay? Remember, for when placing obstacles as normal, the second player places obstacles first. So let's go ahead and just start chucking things down. Remember, they must be placed within the setup area, beyond distance 3 from each player's edge, beyond distance 1 of any other obstacle. Alright, we've chucked a bunch of obstacles down. Okay. Then, after placing obstacles, so you place obstacles as normal, excluding the station. After placing obstacles, place one objective token on each obstacle. So one thing that this doesn't specify, and I will specify for you, who places these objective tokens? Well, according to the rules reference guide, the second player, if he must provide everything for his objectives. Meaning that if you have chosen this objective and it's in your objective pile to put out that the first player can choose from, it is expected of the second player to provide everything that will be needed to play this objective. Meaning it is the second player who will be placing these objective tokens, not the first player. The second player is who places them. Which brings up another question. Where do you put these objective tokens on the obstacle? Now, for almost all of you, you're going to assume, well, I will place the objective token right smack dab in the middle of the obstacle, wouldn't I? Well, it's left rather ambiguous about where you place them. So the common acceptance and ruling that I would make personally, if I had to be forced to make a ruling, it's the second player who's placing them. He can place them anywhere on the obstacle that he wants. And it just says that you must place them on each obstacle. So what defines that? Well, what's going to take this debris here? You could place it right in the middle if you want. You could even place it at the top of the obstacle, bottom of the obstacle. Heck, if you want, it could even be just barely touching on the obstacle, because that still technically is on the obstacle. It doesn't have to be completely within the obstacle. It just needs to be on it. And that technically is still on the obstacle. So I want to make sure that I am being clear with that. Now, as TOs, go by whatever your TO says. He may have a different understanding that he may want you to put it in the middle. But for me, that's technically on the obstacle as stated in what the objective requires. I don't see why it has to be in the middle. And you might even wonder, why does this even matter? Well, if you're bringing a VCX or Lambda with strategic, maybe you want to pull those tokens off. Maybe you want to do something else with them. So that could change where you place these tokens. Again, I want to make sure I'm just being clear on that, because we don't have an official ruling about that. But essentially, as far as it goes, is, your second player, it's your objective, put it where you want. Okay, I think I've covered that. Then the second player places the two Exo Gorf obstacles, each touching a different obstacle. So now we're going to take these Exo Gorfs, and the second player goes, where do I want to put these? Because this is still before deployment. So you need to decide as a strategy where these suckers are going to go that potentially are going to help you out in the squadron phase. You obviously don't want them munching on your own squadrons, or your squadrons as second player. You want them munching on first player. Well, what's great about this is that you can use them offensively or defensively. Do you want to place them to where, right here, for example, where it's touching another obstacle, it kind of creates a little buffer area? Because remember, it makes an attack at all around distance 1. So maybe you put it out here to where if he's got rogues, for example, he doesn't want to put them anywhere near that obstacle. So maybe you deploy your fleet where they'll have a little bit more of a safety barrier. Or you place it more out in the middle to where you can place your squadron somewhere like over here out of that distance 1 attack, but you're still able to kind of get closer to the other player's fleet. So as the second player, you kind of need to be really mindful of where you're placing these obstacles. And again, the Exo Gorfs are still obstacles. They still cause obstruction, okay? All right. So we're going to go ahead and put that one there, and we're going to put this one like right there. Boom. So that's the setup. Now we go into deployment. We're going to go ahead and deploy, some ships and some squadrons, just like that. Boom and boom and boom. All done. Perfect. Alright, the special rule. How does the special rule work? When a ship or squadron overlaps an obstacle, that ship or squadron's owner may remove the objective token on that obstacle to gain 1 victory token. And each victory token is worth 15 points. So remember, the only obstacles that have objective tokens are the initial ones, not the Exo Gorfs. So you have a chance to earn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 times 15, I think, is 60. Numbers, I'm not good with numbers. 75. So you have a chance, there's 75 points on the board that each player could claim. So a second player, you may want to place these obstacles closer to you so you can claim them, but again, if they're closer to you, you're not getting the advantage of placing those exogorfs potentially closer to the other player, and etc. But essentially, any ship, if it maneuvers and it lands on the obstacle, it can claim the objective token if there is one on there, and you get 15 points. Again, it doesn't have to be a ship. It's also saying that a squadron can land on that obstacle and claim the points. So it also encourages, for example, maybe you place the exogorfs on obstacles closer to the first player to discourage him from wanting to throw squadrons on there, because obviously the exogorf will eat them, and then maybe that way you can claim other obstacles. But that is how that works. So essentially, there's five tokens you can claim for victory token. So let's read on to the second part. Or actually, before I get into that, let's talk about VCXs and lambdas. So what happens if an objective token is, I'm going to pretend this is a lambda or V6. It flies up and it pulls that token off of the obstacle. Well, then it can no longer be claimed until it is put back on an obstacle. Because as it says here, it needs to be, if you overlap an obstacle, if the may remove an objective token on that obstacle to gain 1 victory token. So you could, for example, remove, like if this token was here, if you did some maneuvering, you could chuck it off this thing and chuck it over here. You know, it's almost close enough. So let's, for example, let's say that this was like off there. There we go. And you grabbed it. You could throw it from that obstacle and chuck it onto that obstacle, technically, because that's still at distance 1. And then you can move a different squadron to land on there. So it means you could move a token off of a normal obstacle and put it on an Exo Gorf, because an Exo Gorf is still an obstacle. But again, if the objective token is moved and is just out in the middle of the play area, it can't be claimed until it is put back on an obstacle. So that's one thing I want to make sure I'm pointing out. Now, for example, if you did have a token and you move it on top of an Exo Gorf, at some point they do get removed off the board. So they just plop into place and again can't be claimed anymore. What happens if there's multiples on one obstacle, for example? Say a Lambda VCX kind of chains one from one to the other. What does that mean? Well, it says on here that if you overlap it, you can remove an objective token. It doesn't say tokens, it says token. So you can only ever remove one at a time for each ship or squadron movement. Okay, want to make sure that I'm pointing out like all these interactions that can happen, because these are all viable things that you can do as either player. Like for example, Marvro Evol, I think that's how you say his name, the new YV666 and squadron hero that if you move these tokens around, it does special abilities in conjunction with him that you may want to consider. Okay, let's move on to the next part. At the start of each squadron phase, after Exogorfs perform attacks, so the first thing that happens at the start of the squadron phase, if there's squadrons that have moved over here, for example, they've activated, well, the Exogorf, started with the second player, you choose which one you want to do first. You say, I'm going to do this one. So the second player for that Exogorf rolls the attack dice for every single squadron that is at distance 1 of the Exogorf. Again, it doesn't matter if they're on the other side. For example, this obstacle, is it at distance 1? Well, he can, if he's touching that obstacle, he can draw a line of sight through it and smack that squadron. And that's the same thing for any obstacle he's touching. For example, if you somehow push things around, like with Ezra, for example, and he's touching multiple obstacles, it also extends to whatever obstacle he's touching, period. But if he's not touching an obstacle and there's a squadron on the other side of it, when he does draw a line of sight, that would be obstructed because he's not touching that obstacle. But any obstacle he is touching, there is no obstruction. So again, you draw the line of sight, you throw the 3 blue die, and in this case, he does 1 damage to that squadron. But if, for example, this was an unactivated TIE Defender, we'll go ahead and roll the 3 damage again. And there's nothing there, so nothing would happen. Let's just go ahead and roll that again. Here we go. So 2 damage. He would deal 2 damage to that TIE Defender. Not only would he deal 2 damage, he would activate that TIE Defender. Now, this is considered a ship attack, so if it is done against an ace, or you have like Jan Ors around, you can brace, you can reduce the damage. If you got a scatter ace, you can even scatter the damage. But any damage is taken to your squadron. If they're unactivated, they will activate. And then you can't move them at all for that squadron phase, which means they kind of get stuck there until you either squadron command them the next round, or if you don't, then the second player can just slap the Exo Gorf right back down on them again, and then you get stuck in an endless cycle of the space slug eating them over and over. But I do want to make sure I'm pointing out that yes, you can use defense tokens against the Exo Gorf attack. So if you do scatter it, it's treated just like a ship attack. Now, can you choose to not attack any squadrons? No. As it says here in the rulebook, it must attack each squadron. It's just that the second player chooses one, he attacks, rolls all the die. Then the first player chooses the other one, and then he rolls all the die for any squadrons that he can attack, regardless of whom they belong to. Okay. All right. I think I've covered that again in enough detail. So, okay, at the start of each squadron phase, after Exo Gorfs perform attacks, which I've shown, remove each Exo Gorf from the play area. So we're going to pull them off the side of the table over here. Boom, boom. Then the second player moves the obstacle each Exo Gorf was touching to within distance 1 to 2 of its current location. So when you are moving these these obstacles, so we have touching this debris field and this asteroid field, if there is an objective token still on them, as per Rebellion of the Rim rulebook, it will move with that obstacle. They're not left behind, okay? So here, this would move distance 1 to 2. Take that token, put it back on, okay? Obstacles can't overlap each other. You can't move it to overlap another obstacle or ship, or I believe it can't overlap squadrons. So you move it to here. So you could do something like that. Boom. Okay. And if there's other tokens in the area, again, essentially when you're moving these obstacles, it just can't overlap anything. So they just don't overlap anything. Okay. So we've moved them. They're at distance 1 to 2 of the current location. Perfect. Now we go to end of round. So end of round takes place after the status phase, which then each Exo Gorf obstacle not in the play area, the second player chooses an obstacle and places 1 Exo Gorf touching that obstacle. So they're both off. You choose one. I'm going to choose this one as second player, and I'm going to have it touch this obstacle. Okay. In this situation, because of how close these are together, you can actually have it touching both obstacles, but you have to choose specifically and say it's touching this obstacle specifically, but it can still touch other obstacles. And then you can take this one, and again, you can have it touch this obstacle down here because now you're specifying again down there, or if you want to place it over there, whatever obstacle you want them touching. Perfect. We're going to say something like that. This one is touching that asteroid field, and this one is touching that debris field. Perfect. And that is infested fields. So if you want to bring space slugs and you want them to chomp on things, this is an objective for that. It's a great way to try to help bolster your fleet in anti-squadron play. Otherwise, for these obstacles, you really want your squadrons to go fly around and claim them. You really don't want your ships overlapping, things and taking unnecessary damage. So it's kind of like dangerous territory, except squadrons are now included in the fun. Except then there's also space whales, or space slugs that want to eat them. Um, so yeah, that's infested fields. As far as I'm aware, there's no other crazy interactions or nothing else going on, other than make sure you're abiding by any rulebook application in terms of like interdictors and Ezra Bridger, etc. Uh, so yeah, but if you feel like I got anything wrong or if I missed anything, please be sure to point it out. Let me know. Do respond to my comments. If I get something wrong, I make sure to try to fix it. Or if I need to reshoot the video, do that. And I'm so happy this is the last objective I have to cover. Now I can dive into some other content and do some other videos, some other cards. I appreciate you guys watching, and hey, I'll catch you next time.